Hi, welcome to this edition of Give Me a Word, as once again we do a deep dive into a passage of Scripture and see if we can learn anything with the words that might actually help us apply it better to our life. Ephesians 4, verse 32 is familiar to a lot of you. I'm going to read it from the King James Version, so it's going to sound a little bit different than we might normally hear it here at the church at 434 when we read predominantly out of the NIV. But it says this, "And be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you." It's Ephesians 4:32. When Paul writes this letter to the church at Ephesus, this particular phrase, he starts with "be ye." And it's an instruction, but in the Greek, it's a phrase that implies an ongoing process. The idea here is to start where you are and continuously work at it. So in other words, it is about constantly striving, trying, maintaining, and continuing to be kind to one another. This tells us that the trait can be cultivated. Because to be honest with you, some of us aren't real kind. There's a lot of people that kind of start this journey with Jesus, and kindness is not something that they exhibit in their life. But Paul steps in and basically reminds us there's no excuse to lean back and to say, well, this is how I am, this is how I've always been, this is how I'm always going to be. Because we know that the truth of the gospel is that Jesus changes us from the inside out. And here's Paul coming along using a phrase that basically says, you can start, you can hold that position, you can learn, and you can grow. You can be kind to one another. And then behind it, he starts using some other words. He says you can be kind, you can be tenderhearted, you can be forgiving. Each one of those comes behind that first part, that be ye. In other words, each one of these things are things that you not only should do, but you will learn to do, you will get better at doing them, and it will be an ongoing process in your life that you just keep getting better and better at this. So in other words, if you say, well, I'm not real good at any of that right now, great news for you, you got room to grow. The bad news is that it's something that you need to be working on and very consciously working on, trying to do it and trying to do it better. So kindness, tenderheartedness, some of your translations is going to will say gentleness, and forgiving. And then at the end of it, he wraps it up with a phrase or a thought that kind of sets this whole thing in perspective. Because as much as we push back and say, well, I'm just not kind by nature, and I'm not really gentle and tenderhearted by nature, and I'm not really good at forgiving, but yet Paul's saying you can do it and you need to get better at it. And we keep using the excuse that it's just not us, just not us, just not us. Then he throws in this phrase, just as God has done for you. In other words, he's saying Jesus has given you the model. And what God has done for you, you now get the opportunity to put on display in the lives of others. In other words, you get to be kind just as God has been kind to you. Try to model that. You get to be tenderhearted just as God's been tenderhearted and gentle with you. Try to model that. And God has forgiven you. Why don't you try to model that in the life of someone else? So in one phrase, Paul blows up our excuses and loads us up with things that we need to be striving for as followers. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. It's not easy, but you get better at it. And that's what Paul's saying with that very first phrase that kind of leaps off the page when we take the time to read it. Be ye kind. Be ye tenderhearted. Be forgiving. You practice it, and you'll discover that it can happen in your life. I'll practice it, and I can discover the same things. And then together, we will be well on the journey of being who we were created to be. That's what the Word says. Let's try to apply it to our life. Look forward to joining you next time and Give Me a Word.